If you're a business owner thinking about selling, this is for you. Because what most people think is a good exit can quietly turn into a bad one. You spend years building the business. You think the hard part is over when the buyer shows up. But that's usually when the real risk starts. And if you don't understand that risk, you can lose millions without ever seeing exactly where the money went. I spent a long career in M&A thinking I understood how exits were supposed to work. You create the presentation, you send it out, you wait for offers, you negotiate, you close. That was the script. That was the system. And for a long time, I just followed it. But then I watched my friend Adam go through that process, and I felt helpless because Adam thought he was stepping into the finish line. He thought the sale would give him clarity, a clean break, a real reward for everything he had built. Instead, it became something else. He got shortchanged on the upfront cash. He got tied up in a 3-year earnout. And the buyer loaded the business with capital expenditures and management fees. So he ended up losing on the earnout anyway. So what looked like a sale on paper felt very different in real life. He was drained. He was mentally exhausted. And he felt shortchanged. What made it harder for me to watch was that I wasn't standing outside the world of deals. I was buried in my own business, trying to close transactions and keep everything moving. So I knew exactly what was happening to him. I knew he was being worn down. I knew the process was taking more from him than it should. But I was too consumed by my own work to step in and fix it in the moment. And that made it even more painful. Because I had the same reaction every time I thought about it afterward. I should have seen this coming. I should have known better. I should have known the deal could be structured in a way that didn't let him get squeezed like that. That stayed with me. Because I know what it takes to build and run a business. The pressure, the long days, the constant problem solving, the responsibility of carrying employees, customers, and your family's future at the same time. That part is hard enough. So when you finally sell, you expect the exit to feel like relief. You expect it to feel like the reward for all the sacrifice. You expect it to feel like the moment when the weight finally comes off your shoulders. But for Adam, it didn't feel that way. And once I saw him go through it, I started noticing the same pattern everywhere. Different owner, different business, same disappointment, same mismatch between what the seller thought they were getting and what the structure actually delivered. That's when I realized this wasn't just a bad outcome. It was a pattern. And the pattern was costing people a lot of money. Here's the thing most sellers never get told. The problem is usually not just the business. And it's not just the buyer. It's the gap between how the seller sees value and how the buyer sees risk. The seller thinks, I built something valuable. The buyer thinks, I need to make sure I'm not overpaying for hidden problems. And somewhere in the middle, value starts leaking out. That's what makes this so dangerous, because if you've spent 10, 20, or 30 years building a company, you are not just trying to sell a business. You're trying to turn that work into a nest egg. You're trying to protect your family's future. You're trying to make the sacrifice mean something. And if the structure is wrong, the number that looks good at first can turn out to be the wrong outcome entirely. That's where a lot of sellers get caught. Not in the headline number, in the details. A little less cash up front, a little more risk pushed into the earnout, a little more exposure to fees, capex, or post-close interpretation, and then a little more. And a little more until the final result looks nothing like what was promised at the beginning. If you want to know where your business really stands before you ever talk to a buyer, I've put 2 links in the description on the GetDealFlow.ai website. One is for your exit readiness score. The other is for an estimated business valuation. Use both before you go to market, because the right starting point changes everything. I kept seeing the same thing happen. A business would have real value, maybe far more value than the first offer suggested. But the process would drag. The buyer would get more cautious. Diligence would uncover friction. The earnout would get more complicated. And the seller would slowly realize the headline number was never the real number. That's the trap. It doesn't always show up as a disaster. Sometimes it shows up as 1,000 small compromises. A little less certainty, a little more pressure, a little more exposure, a little more frustration. And by the time the seller sees the full picture, the value has already leaked out. What finally pushed me over the edge was realizing how often this repeated. I saw businesses that could have been worth $240 million end up around $90 million because the process wasn't built to uncover and capture the full value. That is not a small miss. That is generational money. And once you see that enough times, you stop asking, how do I sell this better? You start asking, Why are we letting the process break the result? That question changed everything for me. I stopped thinking like a banker who just packages the deal, and I started thinking like someone who had to fix the deal before it ever hit the market. That shift led to a stalled transaction that taught me more than any polished presentation ever could. I was in a deal that had gotten stuck, and instead of just pushing harder, I asked the buyer a simple question: what's actually bothering you? That changed everything. Because once he answered, I realized the concerns weren't random. They weren't emotional. They were real. And they were the exact kind of concerns you can solve if you understand the transaction from both sides. He wasn't just trying to buy a business, he was trying to buy certainty. He was trying to protect himself from hidden surprises. He was trying to make sure the story on paper matched the reality in the business. And once I saw that, the whole game changed because the answer wasn't to argue harder. The answer was to structure smarter. If you can design the deal around the buyer's real concerns while still protecting the seller's interests, you can create a much better outcome for both sides. That means cash up front. It means earnout design. It means escrow. It means rollover. It means structuring the deal so the buyer can say yes with confidence, and the seller doesn't have to give away the store to make it happen. That sounds simple, but it changes everything. Because now you are not just selling a business, you are engineering the transaction before the market ever sees it. You start looking at the business through the buyer's eyes. Where does the buyer get nervous? Where does the seller lose leverage? Where does value leak? That's where the real work happens. That's why I created GetDealFlow.ai with my two partners. We wanted a better system for business owners, a system that helps owners clean up the business before sale, a system that identifies the top value destroying elements, a system that structures the transaction in a way that works for both sides. Because here's the truth: you can have a stronger business and still leave money on the table if the deal is structured badly. And you can have a buyer who wants to buy but can't get comfortable enough to move quickly. So the real opportunity is bridging that gap. That's what we built around. Let me give you one example. We had a business that had already been offered $90 million. On the surface, that sounded meaningful. But when we dug in, we found 5 critical weaknesses suppressing value by roughly $70 million. Owner dependence, margin volatility, financial complexity, customer concentration, and the wrong buyer profile. That's when the picture got clear. The business itself wasn't broken. The way it was being presented and the way it was being sold was broken. So we didn't rush back to market. We paused. We repositioned the company for 12 months. We stabilized margins. We reduced operational complexity. We built a stronger management team. We made the business less dependent on the owner. We cleaned up the financials. We documented the operation. We made it easier to underwrite. Then we targeted the right buyers, not a random blast. Just the right strategic buyers, the ones who could actually justify premium value. And here's where it got interesting. Once the business was ready, the whole process changed. The buyers came in with more urgency. The conversations got sharper, the diligence got fewer, and because the structure had already been thought through, the deal moved faster. That business ultimately closed at $240 million with 0 retrades. That's not luck, that's design. But even after that success, the work wasn't over because I kept seeing the same challenge. We could improve the business. We could make it more attractive. We could create interest from the right buyers. But if the structure wasn't built correctly from the start, the seller could still lose value during the transaction. And honestly, my personal why came from Adam. I couldn't shake what happened to him, not just the money, not just the earnout, but the emotional toll. He was exhausted. He was disappointed. And he didn't get the dream nest egg he thought he was building for his family. That stayed with me. Because no founder should have to spend years building something meaningful only to feel like the system took more than it gave back. So now the work is simple to explain, even if it takes real effort to execute. We help owners improve the business before sale. We identify the issues that destroy value. We fix what can be fixed quickly. We create deal structures that solve buyer concerns without hurting the seller. And we move the process forward faster because everybody knows what matters from the beginning. If you're a business owner thinking about selling, here's the thing to remember. The sale process should not be the part that destroys the value you spent years creating. A good-looking offer is not always a good outcome. The structure matters. The preparation matters. The buyer's concerns matter. And the order you handle those things in matters even more. That's why I built this. to help founders avoid the kind of exit that leaves them shortchanged, exhausted, and stuck wondering what happened. Because if you do it right, a sale should reward the years you spent building the business. It should create the nest egg. It should protect the upside. And it should feel like the finish line, not a new battle. If you're even thinking about selling, I've included 2 links in the description on the GetDealFlow.ai website. One is for your exit readiness score. The other is for an estimated business valuation. Use them to see where you stand before you go to market and before a buyer tells you what your business is worth. That's the system I believe in, and that's the system we're building.